It started with a missing document. A routine California charity filing flagged Archewell as delinquent, a seemingly simple error that peeled back a far more damaging narrative. As investigations widened, regulators uncovered signs of unauthorized fundraising, questions over donation use, and troubling overlaps with political campaigns. Meghan Markle's name surfaced repeatedly in the filings and press coverage, with analysts drawing a direct line between the foundation's branding strategy and her royal identity. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. Within weeks, public confidence crumbled, media pressure exploded, and the legal machinery began to move, dragging Harry and Meghan into yet another crisis they couldn't contain. This unraveling didn't just affect their public image, it rewrote the dynamics inside the monarchy. The royal family's internal response grew colder and more deliberate. Strategic meetings led by Princess marked a turning point, as royal allies drew sharp boundaries and moved swiftly to dissociate. With Meghan facing lawsuits and Harry engulfed in fallout, their confirmed divorce sealed a sense of finality. The royal institution, already under pressure in a modern media age, now appeared determined to set a precedent. Scandal, no matter how royal the name, would be met with distance. The scandal didn't start with a bang. It started with a deadline. Specifically, the missed one. When Meghan Markle's Archewell Foundation was flagged as delinquent in the state of California, most people thought it was a clerical hiccup, some in turn forgetting to hit submit. But it snowballed into something much bigger, and Princess was the first to treat it like the institutional emergency it was. She didn't mince words. In a rare public statement, she condemned the misuse of royal associations, calling it disgraceful and damaging to the crown. And wasn't acting solo. She was backed, silently but deliberately, by King Charles and Camilla. Button led the charge. The tone was clear. The Sussexes were no longer under the royal family's umbrella. The message? You go rogue. You're on your own. And if you drag the institution's name through the Archewell Foundation's troubles didn't stop at a misfiling. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. Once the California Attorney General's office started poking around, deeper cracks showed. Unauthorized fundraising, improperly documented expenses, and blurred lines between charitable work and personal promotion. Meghan had positioned herself as a global changemaker, but investigators painted a different picture, a foundation leveraging royal branding to secure deals, partnerships, and influence. At the center of it all was Meghan. Public records linked Archewell's donations to her own brand deals, including speaking engagements and content partnerships that aligned suspiciously well with foundation events. Critics jumped on it. They accused her of self-enrichment under the guise of charity. Lawsuits followed. First defamation claims, then broader allegations of charity fraud. She denied it all, but public sentiment was already shifting. Harry wasn't untouched by the chaos. Though he kept a lower profile, his name was still on the documents. The foundation was, after all, a joint project. What started as a symbol of their new life in the U.S. was now being dissected by lawyers, journalists, and government officials. The freedom they chased was becoming a legal trap. And then came the divorce confirmation. Whispers turned into reports, and reports turned into filings. It was formal and messy. Shared custody was negotiated for the children. Archewell was now more Meghan's mess than Harry's. But public sympathy didn't swing in his favor. To many, he'd chosen this path, and now he was drowning in the consequences. Inside the royal machine, damage control was a full-time job. Senior aides held meetings around the clock. The Queen may have passed, but the institution was still fighting for survival in a very modern media war. Meghan and Harry had crossed a line, not just morally, but politically. The fact that Archewell had partnered with politically sensitive organizations stirred alarm. Royal neutrality is sacred. Once Archewell dipped into electoral causes and political advocacy, that neutrality was shattered. Even overseas, diplomats were raising eyebrows. The monarchy wasn't just embarrassed. It was compromised, and the only solution was distance, permanent, public, and strategic. While Princess Catherine remained publicly silent, insiders reported that she was deeply affected, not just by the scandal, but by what it meant for the institution her children would inherit. She'd tried to support reconciliation in the past, pushing for family unity behind closed doors. But now, the breach was unrepairable. The fallout also dragged her into public scrutiny, with tabloids picking apart her every move. She became an unwilling symbol of the royals who stayed, forced into a contrast she never asked for. The pressure mounted as social media turned the situation into a narrative war. Meghan the disruptor versus Kate the loyalist. It wasn't fair, but it was effective. The irony didn't go unnoticed. While Meghan faced legal heat over financial misconduct, Prince Andrew's name started trending again. Comparisons were inevitable. Two royal scandals, different in nature but identical in damage. The public asked, why was Meghan being publicly eviscerated while Andrew had slipped back into private life? Behind the scenes, Andrew was quietly warned, stay invisible. His Epstein ties remained a ticking time bomb, and with Meghan's scandal in the spotlight, the palace couldn't afford another resurgence of his name in the headlines. But the damage was done. Every time a royal scandal made the news, Andrew's name came back to haunt them. Camilla, who had spent years trying to win public favor, was now in the middle of another PR crisis. Her attempt to play the calm matriarch was disrupted by the endless news cycles. Photos of her looking weary circulated online, with commentators reading exhaustion in every wrinkle. Her public appearances were fewer and more controlled. When she did speak, she focused on tradition, stability, and the importance of service. The unspoken message was clear. This is what royalty should look like. It was a sharp contrast to the chaotic narrative surrounding Harry and Meghan. Charles, too, was walking a tightrope. He wanted to appear firm, but not cruel, decisive, but not vindictive. So he deployed the one tool he still had, silence. While Princess had made public declarations, Charles worked the diplomatic channels. He quietly authorized internal audits, legal reviews, and media briefings. His goal wasn't just containment, it was legacy. If the monarchy was going to survive in the digital age, it had to prove that it could handle internal crises without falling apart. Charles knew the stakes. One misstep, and the institution would look fragile. Worse, it would look obsolete. Harry's fall from grace was brutal. Once the public's favorite royal rebel, he now faced a wave of criticism not even his mother's legacy could shield him from. His approval ratings tanked. Former allies distanced themselves. His memoir, once a best-selling catharsis, now read like a foreshadowing of self-destruction. Privately, Harry was said to be devastated by the divorce. But the institution had moved on. There would be no public displays of support, no olive branches. The firm had decided. Harry and Meghan had chosen independence, and now they had to deal with independences and King Charles, photos. As the chaos peaked, the royal strategy was finally visible, and played the enforcer. Camilla embodied stoicism. Charles stayed behind the curtain, pulling strings. Together, they formed a triangle of control, each representing a different weapon, discipline, image, and silence. They weren't just trying to save face. They were preparing for the monarchy's next era, one with fewer working royals, tighter rules, and zero tolerance for scandal. The Archewell saga had proven how quickly things could spiral, and how much damage two individuals could cause when left. The lawsuits just kept coming. Meghan's legal team was swamped, defamation here, fraud there, with every filing dredging up more uncomfortable receipts. She remained defiant, releasing statements about transparency, about intention, about being misunderstood. But it didn't land. The court of public opinion had already reached its verdict, and the headlines weren't kind. Her supporters tried to reframe the narrative. They blamed royal interference, media bias, even political sabotage. But the documents didn't lie. The timelines were messy. The paper trail between donations and personal ventures was worse. And the optics? Disastrous. Meghan's personal brand was meant to be polished, purpose-driven, global. Now it was entangled in red tape, regulatory flags, and very public. Harry, meanwhile, had started to look like a ghost of himself. Once fiery and outspoken, he had grown quieter, more withdrawn. Sources close to him described a man overwhelmed, not just by the media, but by the consequences of decisions that had spun out of control. He had stood by Meghan for every move, every pivot. Now he was watching their empire unravel, piece by piece. He was still trying to protect her, but even that role was becoming impossible. Every new headline chipped away at his credibility. The man who had once walked behind Diana's casket as a child was now walking through the ruins of his own choices. And this time, no one was clearing the path for him. It's wild how quickly the narrative flipped. When they sat down for the Oprah interview, they were seen as truth-tellers, breaking from a rigid institution, exposing outdated norms, reclaiming their voice. But fast forward to now, and the same media that once praised their bravery was dragging them through the mud. The contrast was brutal. Then, candlelit confessions and controlled vulnerability. Now, depositions, subpoenas, and scandal fatigue. Their image makeover had been total until it wasn't. People started re-watching that interview not with empathy, but skepticism. Were they being honest? Or were they already building? As Archewell's situation worsened, it reopened old wounds for the royal family, particularly the ones tied to Prince Andrew. Virginia Giuffre's case had been settled, yes, but not forgotten, and the re-emergence of royal scandal put Andrew back in the spotlight whether he liked it or not. His association with Epstein continued to haunt the institution. Now, it was fueling a comparison. Why had the royal family worked so hard to quietly bury Andrew's mess while taking a public sledgehammer to Harry and Meghan? It wasn't a flattering contrast, and the hypocrisy wasn't lost on the public, or the press. The firm was scrambling, not because they didn't expect backlash, but because the backlash had become global. Headlines from LA to London were spinning out royal scandal reels, dragging centuries-old traditions into conversations about money laundering, ethics, and influence peddling. This wasn't just gossip, it was governance. Meetings were constant. Communications teams worked overtime crafting denials, non-responses, and carefully worded statements that said absolutely nothing. The playbook was old. Stay silent. Let it blow over. But in 2025, nothing just blows over. Every TikTok video, podcast episode, and viral think piece gave the story new life. For Catherine, it was a PR nightmare with no exit. The tabloids hounded her for responses she was never going to give. Was she shocked by the divorce? Was she speaking to Harry? What did she think of Meghan's lawsuits? The speculation was endless, and so were the think pieces analyzing her facial expressions at public events. Even her charity work, usually a safe haven, became a target. Reporters asked if she felt Archewell's scandal tainted public trust in royal charitable institutions. She never responded, but her silence only invited more headlines. She had become a proxy battleground in a war she never asked to fight. Charles, meanwhile, had moved from subtle to strategic. He started shifting funds. Senior royal roles were restructured. A quiet but deliberate effort was underway to slim down the monarchy, not just symbolically, but financially. There would be fewer titles handed out, fewer working royals, and stricter oversight on those who stayed. Insiders said it was about optics, but also survival. With public trust in decline, Charles knew they had to project responsibility. The Archewell mess had exposed just how vulnerable the royals were to modern scandal. So he adapted. No more blank checks. No more private family matters. From now on, everything would be scrutinized. William was furious, not in the shouting, slamming doors way, but in the cold, distant way that meant you were done in his eyes. He had tried to reconcile with Harry. He had warned them, repeatedly, about the risks of blurring the line between royalty and business. And now he was watching the fallout confirm every one of his fears. Publicly, he kept his composure. But privately, sources described him as deeply disappointed and embarrassed by his brother. He saw it not just as a family failure, but as a betrayal of duty. Every scandal that touched Harry and Meghan cast a shadow on the rest of them. William knew that, and he wasn't in the mood to forgive it. As all of this unfolded, Princess remained consistent. No nonsense, no drama, just action. She had stepped into a surprising leadership role throughout the scandal, rallying the family around institutional stability. She didn't care about hashtags or headlines. She cared about the monarchy surviving. And when she announced that there would be a full legal review of all associations between royal titles and external foundations, it sent a clear message. This wasn't about Harry and Meghan anymore. It was about policy. If anyone thought they could slap a royal connection onto a pet project for profit, they were going to think again. Back at Royal Lodge, the atmosphere was tense. It had once been a refuge for royals, quiet, private, steeped in tradition. Now it felt like a bunker. Internal meetings were held away from the public eye, strategies discussed over tea and clenched jaws. Staff were instructed to prepare for more scrutiny, more oversight, and potentially more resignations. The old model of royalty, discreet, respected, untouchable, was officially over. Archewell's scandal had changed that. The monarchy was now a crisis PR operation with centuries of baggage and no margin for error. And everyone inside those gilded walls knew. Harry's isolation wasn't just physical. It was personal, strategic, and painful. Former friends, media allies, even celebrity collaborators quietly distanced themselves. The energy around him had shifted. He wasn't the misunderstood younger royal anymore. He was a man caught in a self-made storm, watching the world close ranks without him. Even within his remaining circles, there was confusion. Should they continue defending him? Could they separate Harry from the chaos of Archewell? Every attempt to clarify his position only seemed to backfire. The more he spoke, the worse it looked. At a certain point, silence became his only strategy, even if it came to... Meghan didn't retreat. She rebranded, again, just like post-royal exit, just like post-Oprah. But this time, the stakes were higher. She hired new legal counsel, switched PR firms, and began a campaign to reclaim the narrative. She wasn't guilty. She argued. She was targeted. The narrative pivoted toward victimhood. She cited political motivations, anti-feminist backlash, and systemic racism. Some supporters rallied. Others rolled their eyes. The scandal had simply become too big to white-knuckle through. Her credibility, once tied to sleek media productions and curated interviews, was now fighting a losing battle against raw court filings and real-world scrutiny. And remained unmoved. The drama was exhausting, but she never showed it. As legal probes expanded and Archewell's financials became public domain, her resolve only sharpened. She pushed for long-term institutional reforms. Stricter rules around royal patronages, permanent restrictions on title usage for those stepping back, and oversight committees to prevent this kind of debacle from ever happening again. For the public, and had become the quiet MVP. She didn't posture, she didn't perform. She acted, and her no-frills approach hit differently in a media landscape drowning in scandal and spin. She wasn't trying to win headlines. She was trying to save the monarchy from self-inflicted collapse. William, too, had reached a breaking point. He'd held back from publicly criticizing his brother for years. But privately, the gloves were off. Staffers said he was furious that Archewell had ever been allowed to operate in proximity to royal legacy. He viewed the entire mess as avoidable, if only Harry had listened. There was no gloating, just frustration. William's future depended on the credibility of the monarchy. Every time a scandal chipped away at that foundation, he lost ground before even taking the throne. For him, this wasn't sibling rivalry. It was sabotage, and he was done playing nice about it. Camilla watched it unfold with a kind of resigned sadness. She'd been the target of public hate before. She knew how relentless the headlines could be. But she also knew the cost when the monarchy failed to draw a line. If they didn't make an example of Harry and Meghan, the rot would spread. So she remained composed. No comments, no leaks. But those close to her said she was deeply shaken, not just by the scandal itself, but by how quickly the Sussexes had burned through every ounce of goodwill. The media environment was unforgiving, yes, but it was also reactive, and their downfall had been largely self-authored. Amid the Archewell chaos, Andrew's ghost re-emerged. His scandal wasn't active anymore, but the timing was brutal. Archewell's investigations reignited media interest in royal finances, connections, and immunity. And Andrew, still living in luxury, still publicly silent, became the comparison nobody wanted but couldn't avoid. Some called it hypocrisy. Others called it strategy. Either way, it complicated everything. If Meghan was under federal probe and Andrew was under royal protection, what message did that send? The firm had no easy answers. And the media didn't care about nuance. It wanted blood. The second, photos. Through it all, One image kept surfacing. Queen Elizabeth. Her portrait, her speeches, her legacy. The press used her as a benchmark. What would the Queen have thought of all this? How would she have responded? Her era, in comparison, felt like ancient history. Orderly, controlled, reputable. Elizabeth's death had left a vacuum, not just of power but of discipline. And this scandal proved it. The new era of royals hadn't earned the same reverence. They were human, fallible, and increasingly public in ways that hurt more than helped. Archewell wasn't just a rogue foundation. It was a symptom of the monarchy's fading mystique. Back in California, Harry and Meghan were on defense. The divorce was final. Public opinion was in free fall. And the foundation was hemorrhaging influence. Former partners paused collaborations. Events were cancelled. Donations dried up. The brand had become radioactive. For a while, it seemed like they might try a comeback. But there was no clear path. The public didn't want another docuseries, another interview, another rebranding campaign. They wanted accountability, and neither Harry nor Meghan seemed capable of delivering it in a way that landed. At the palace, there was no gloating, just recalibration. Every arm of the firm, press, protocol, philanthropy, was being audited. If Archewell had shown anything, it was that modern royals couldn't afford opacity. The next scandal couldn't be explained away. It had to be prevented. So the institution began to evolve. Slowly, reluctantly, but undeniably, roles were redefined. Expectations were made explicit. The royals who stayed on the inside had to prove their worth. The ones who left, they were on their own, permanently. The door wasn't just closed, it was sealed. Charles ended it the way he always does, measured, quiet, firm. No dramatic statements. No public fallout. Just a shift. Archewell was now a case study in what happens when royal privilege goes rogue. And Charles made sure that the entire family, present and future, understood that lesson. His legacy, already under pressure from a changing world, now had to absorb the Archewell collapse. But instead of letting it define his reign, he absorbed it into the broader transformation. Less glamour, more governance. Less deference, more discipline. The monarchy wasn't just evolving, it was bracing. In the end, this wasn't just a story about one couple, one foundation, or one scandal. It was a mirror held up to the royal institution, and what stared back wasn't flattering. Archewell's collapse exposed the fragility of legacy when it collides with ego, ambition, and miscalculated independence. As the dust settles, one thing is crystal clear. The crown protects itself, and anyone who steps outside its shadow better be ready for the storm that follows. If you're still with us after all that royal whiplash, you know the drama's far from over. What do you think? Was this accountability, betrayal, or just the inevitable fallout of a modern monarchy? Drop your thought below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more breakdowns of royal chaos and celebrity meltdowns. There's always another storm coming.